Now, it might feel that the worst of winter is behind us, but there's still a lot of mud out there and certainly a lot more rain to come until spring, which does mean that you're going to be maintaining your bike lots until that point, which means there's still a load of great hacks and tech tips that can help you on your way. First up, mudguard hacks. Now, let's not beat around the bush here. The only reason that mountain bikers put mudguards on their bikes is to keep the spray out of your face, basically out of your vision, so you can ride faster. And of course, here and there to basically protect some delicate parts of your bike, like your fork seals perhaps, or sometimes suspension bearings. They're certainly not there to keep you clean. They will not have the same effect as a set of full-length guards on a road bike. Now at GMBN we run mud hugger guards, and there's quite a few different options available, from the full-length FRX to the shorty that I've got on this bike. Now clearly the bigger guard is going to offer more protection against spray, but on this bike I tend to ride in a lot of areas with heavy mud, like really thick stuff that clogs stuff up. And the shorty actually sits a bit higher, there's less of it as well, and there's a lot more clearance around the tyre, so it's very beneficial for this bike. And of course I emphasise the point, I don't ride this one as fast as I ride my Mega. On the Mega, I really like the protection of a full-length guard. However, with a full-length mud guard of any kind, you're going to have to sacrifice something, and that is mud clearance. But there's some cool little hacks you can do, especially if, like me, you end up running a huge front tyre and the fork brace on your particular bike doesn't allow positioning of the mud guard in a place with optimum mud clearance. Now I've done this cool little hack where essentially I offered the mudguard up to my fork brace and I cut a little notch out of the mudguard just so I can bump it up very slightly. Now it's not changed the way the mudguard performs in any way. The seals are still protected by the sides of the mudguard here. It just enables it to sit that little bit higher, and that 2.4 tyre I really favour up front is a particularly tall one. So in the local conditions near to where we ride here at GMBN, it's really thick with clay and it can cause problems here and there. But do what the pros do what the pro mechanics do, and hack stuff apart. Make it work for you. In recent times, I was looking at Sam Hill's bike. Now, Sam Hill's Nukeproof Mega, he's got one of the shorties up front, but he's also got one on the back that's been butchered so it fits around his chainline. Now, this is a front mudguard, it's not a rear mudguard. And the reason he's got it there is not to keep his bike clean and protected from the spray. It's actually there to stop the mud building up in areas where it weighs lots. Now mud can weigh a lot. When it comes off that back wheel, it's going to collect in areas around the yoke, around the bottom pivot here and all that sort of stuff. And by having a mudguard on there, certainly with the speed that Sam rides, it's deflecting that crap all out of the way and back down to the floor. It's going to avoid it all collecting on the bike. And it ultimately means between stages of enduro races, if he does need to sort of clean anything with a water bowl, it means the bike is going to be fit for action straight away. Now, a couple of weeks ago on the weekly GMBN Tech Show, in the news, I talked about a product by Bikeco called the Willy. Amusingly named, it's a black rubber boot that effectively seals off your seat tube junction. It's a really neat looking product, and because it's a bespoke product, it does look very cool. However, if you've got a lot of old inner tubes lying around, you can achieve a pretty similar result if you're willing to sort of forgive the looks. It doesn't look good, but you can make a little simple rubber boot using a couple of cable ties and a section of old inner tube. Now this does work well, but something to bear in mind whenever you're applying a boot to a bike is whilst they can keep the crap out, sometimes if the crap's in it, it can keep it in, which is why I would never recommend putting one over something like a suspension fork seal or a dropper post seal. And also, if you cable tie one onto your dropper post, there's a chance that a cable tie can slip and actually scuff the actual stanchion tube of that post. So I would avoid that. However, the one going over the clamp of the frame, that is fantastic. You can put a blob of grease around the top, seal it all in, and that should be done for winter. It should work fantastically. Whilst you're in the area, you may as well, if you haven't got a RockShox reverb that is, if you've got any other type of dropper post, unscrew the seal here, put some fork oil underneath it, screw it back in place just to keep everything at bay and operating nice and smoothly. Now hopefully, I'd assume that most of you have probably got a waterproof jacket and some of you will be riding in waterproof shorts or trousers. Now get yourself some waterproof spray and you can actually make your bag fairly waterproof, or at least helps stop stuff sticking to it and getting it saturated. Now my camelbacks that I use at the weekends all have a coating of this stuff on the bottom. Now I'm well aware it's not going to turn a non-waterproof item into a waterproof one, but it can help stopping it get saturated, which means if you're carrying spare clothing and other stuff inside, it does help add to the waterproofness of the bag. Now something on my daily bag that I used to ride to work, it actually stops stuff sticking to the bag quite as much. Now I do ride through a muddy park on the way to work every day, and you can see just the general state of the bag. It's got a few speckles of mud and stuff on it, but it does mean with this on, it doesn't absorb it too much and it does get cleaned a lot easier. But if you wanted to go one step further, something you can invest in, which is very cool, is wax. Now I've got this particular stuff for waxing a coat. There's various different types out there, but beeswax, you can get it in blocks like this. If you rub this stuff onto the bottom of your bag or areas that you want to waterproof, then you just need like a hairdryer or a heat gun just to apply some heat so it soaks into the fabric. It does a really, really good job. It's not too expensive. You can get it from outdoor stores and home stores and other stuff like that. It's a real good little hack. Now, if you don't have some proper weatherproof shoes, if you've got something a little bit more like the ones Blake's wearing in this video I shot with him, they've got the surface of the shoe is quite shiny, so it's pretty good with keeping water at bay. But if you coat them with some silicone spray, it actually really helps mud and other stuff stop sticking to them. It's really, really useful stuff. And another great hack you can do with shoes, especially if you're a flat pedal rider and you've got laces that are exposed to the elements on your shoes, is wax the laces. Now waxing the laces stops them soaking up water like a sponge. And despite what you think, you can wax the laces and you can still tie your laces, provided you actually tie your laces correctly. You may laugh at me for that, but I watched the TED Talks on tying shoelaces a few years back and it changed my life. I've been tying my laces wrong forever. In fact, I'm going to put a link to that video underneath this video because I think you should check it out. But wax your laces, works a treat. And whilst we're on the subject of wet riding gear, one of my best little hacks that I really like doing is getting some antibacterial household spray. Once I've cleaned my riding shoes and they're obviously drying out, spray them with that stuff because it avoids that horrible funk that you can get from knee pads and riding shoes, in particular if they've got like neoprene cuffs. They develop that certain smell. I know you know what I'm talking about, and it really does help. Now, protecting your frame from knocks and scrapes is always a good idea, especially if you've got a nice new bike. Take advantage of that, fit yourself an Invisiframe kit or some heli tape or something similar on the market. We've got our own ones of those. It's a really good idea to do exactly that. Now, in winter, it actually is almost more important because, just for example, where cables rub on the frame and they rub your paint away, when those cables are covered in mud and grit, it does that twice as fast. It can be really, really abrasive. So make sure you pay attention to your frame. Get yourself a kit that come with various different sized pads on them, apply them correctly. Now make sure, if you're not applying it to a fresh frame, get some like a contact clean or something similar with isopropyl alcohol in there and clean the area completely so it has no residue, no grease, nothing that's gonna avoid the adhesive doing its job. And place them on carefully and just work your way around the bike. Now there's two other areas in particular you want to pay attention to, especially, might add, with winter conditions. First one is the top tube of the bike. Now the reason for that is, let's just say you're riding with knee pads, your knee pads are going to get wet and muddy at some point, and when you're riding, you might not realise this, but you rub your knee pads on your top tube quite a lot. Now that can happen when you're cornering, or it can happen just when you're riding if you're using bulky knee pads. So do yourself a favour and get your top tube covered up on your bike. And whilst you're at it, do the chainstays as well. Winter riding shoes are quite often chunkier than the riding shoes you use in summer and other times. And again, if you're riding on flat pedals or if you ride with your feet at 10 to 2, you're likely to take the paint off your frame. So do yourself a favour, protect it. Now I actually made a video on installing some frame protection onto one of Neil's bikes last year on GMBN. I'm going to put the link to that in the description below. And if you want to know anything more about frame protection, just add a comment in the comments below. Sintered pads last longest in winter. All right, so it's not really a hack, but nonetheless, it's a good tip and it's one that we should all listen to, especially if you're riding sandy, wet, muddy conditions. Now, sintered or metal pads certainly do last the longest, but as a downside, They do make a bit of noise when they're wet and maybe if they haven't heated up yet. And it's a sort of an undulating ride where you're not really using the brakes that much. You'll notice, even if your brakes are bedded in properly, that they're going to squeal from time to time. I know my brakes on this, after riding in the snow, they were howling. But at the same time, I'm willing to put up with that because otherwise I'll be going through pads constantly in the winter conditions around the GMBN offices. Now the next best bet is semi-metallic. So you get a little bit more traction, a little bit more grip with them. They're a lot quieter, but they do have some of the benefits of a metallic backing to them to avoid wearing down. What you don't want to be using are resin pads. Now resin pads, although they don't favour the wet conditions, they do grab quite well. However, they'll wear out super fast and cost you loads of money. Now, if you don't want to use the all-round sintered pads all year round on your bike, maybe take a tip from some of the Scandinavian drivers who have winter tyres and summer tyres and do the same with your brake pads. Have some winter pads and you can always have your resin or your organic pads for summer use. Cover up the rear of your brake arch. Now, whether you're using mudguard or not, it's a haven for mud to collect, and the best way to do it is sticker bomb it. You can use some GMBN stickers, you can use the RockShox stickers that can be a RockShox forks, just like I did on my commuter bike, or you can simply use some black electrical tape and just wrap it around that fork brace. You don't have to keep it there all the time. If you just do it through winter, it stops them all filling up with mud and makes things a lot easier to clean. Moto Foam. Now this stuff is a non-porous foam. It will not absorb moisture or mud or anything like that. It's used by a lot of motocross mechanics, and the sort of places they'll put it on a bike will be above the sump guard, for example, that sits down here, where there's going to be holes where otherwise heavyweight mud would just pack in there when they're riding. Now a lot of downhill mechanics have been using this on downhill race bikes, and you're seeing the same on enduro bikes in certain situations. Now the idea is to stuff it in places where mud would collect, which means it's going to be faster to clean the bike's not going to get bogged down with heavy mud. Now you can do this on your own bike, it's quite cheap, you can get this on eBay and other auction sites like that, and you can stuff it in places like this where rocks and other things can actually find their way in. Quite handy stuff, it's quite cheap, doesn't look the best, but it means for winter your bike might handle that bit better with a little less weight on it. Dry lube. Now, it might sound crazy because we always recommend using dry lube in summer conditions and wet lube in winter conditions, but I actually favour dry lube all year round. Now, of course, when it's absolutely hammering down and I'm riding in the wettest conditions, I will always use the thicker wet lube. But for most of the time, I'll stick to dry lube. And the reason for that, quite simply, is less stuff is attracted to my drivetrain, which means it's easier to clean. When I go for a ride, a typical Sunday morning ride, I'll go out, I'll get covered in mud and muck, I'll come back and I want to clean my bike as fast as possible. I've got other stuff I need to do. Now, if my drivetrain needs a full degrease and clean because it's got wet lube on there with all the mud and muck and other stuff that sticks to it, I could be a couple of hours fully cleaning that bike. If I use dry lube, I can pretty much wash it off, clean the bike, apply some fresh lube and go about my day. Check it out, it's quite good stuff. And the last one, a bit of a classic actually, but it's always worth reiterating, is getting some skateboard grip tape. You can get enough to cover a deck, doesn't cost a lot of money. You can share it around to all your friends and use this on your brake levers, on your shift levers, on your dropper post remote, any areas like that you can struggle for a little bit of grip. Just bear in mind though, if you use something that's too coarse, it can actually sort of affect the ends of your gloves, it can sort of affect the fabric a bit, but if you're more bothered about actual performance, then it's a really good little hack. So there you go, there's some winter hacks and tips for you. Especially useful, no doubt, if like myself, you end up riding in mud and rain a lot of the time. For a couple more videos, if you want to beat the winter, click down here and see what Blake and Neil got up to. And for looking after your riding kit, click up there. As always, give us a thumbs up if you love GMBN Tech. If you've got any ideas, let us know in those comments below. And if you've got any better hacks, let us know those too. In the meantime, click that subscribe button and share it around.